My husband's mother thought it'd be funny to leave me stranded in a small town in France. She said I needed perspective, that I'd forgotten my place in the family. So when I spoke up at dinner, just once she and my husband left me there. No passport, no money, no warning. I sold my wedding ring the next morning and walked toward the life they thought I'd never find. I still remember the sound of the car door slamming, the way the taillights disappeared down that narrow French road. For a few seconds, I stood frozen. I thought it was a joke, a scare tactic. Then the silence hit me aloud, heavy, final. I checked my phone. No signal, no card, no way home. That's when the sting turned to fire. Not just at Thomas, at his mother, at myself for shrinking, for bending, for trying so hard to fit into a family that never wanted me whole. But I didn't cry, not that night. I made one promise instead. If they wanted me gone, I'd show them what gone really looks like. It wasn't always like this. Or maybe it was, and I just didn't want to see it. When Thomas and I first started dating, his mother Loretta welcomed me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd say things like, "We're not used to girls like you in our family," then follow it up with a sweet laugh and another slice of pie. I told myself it was nerves, that she'd come around. But she never really did. Loretta had a way of controlling a room without raising her voice. She could make you feel foolish without ever insulting you directly. Her compliments were always a little too sharp. "You've got such bold taste in clothes," she'd say. Or, "You don't cook like we do in this family, but that's okay." Every generation strays a little. At first, I tried to win her over. I dressed more conservatively around her. I baked using her handwritten recipes, even though she'd quietly swap out the dishes when guests arrived. I'd smile through dinners where everyone laughed at stories I didn't know, traditions I hadn't grown up with. They always included me, just enough to keep me quiet. Never enough to make me feel part of them. Thomas didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. Anytime I brought it up, he'd say, "That's just how my mom is. Don't take it so personally." When I mentioned how Amber, his younger sister, always rolled her eyes at my ideas or took credit for the ones I suggested, he shrugged. "She's blunt. You're too sensitive." So I stayed quiet. I smiled through it. I told myself this was just how families were, messy, tight-knit, slow to trust outsiders. And I worked hard to earn my place. I gave up my job at the firm when we got married, thinking it was temporary. "You're so organized," Thomas had said. "You'd be amazing at managing our social life." What started as me helping with events and planning soon turned into running everything behind the scenes, vacations, birthdays, charity functions, all without ever putting my name on anything. Still, I believed in the long game. I thought love and effort would eventually be enough. Then came the family retreat. Loretta called it that, a bonding trip, just us. No distractions. Back to our roots. They picked a small French town in Provence where her great-grandparents had lived. Quaint, quiet, off the grid. I was hesitant. I suggested something more neutral. Thomas looked disappointed. "This means a lot to my mom. Can't you just be on board, for once?" So I agreed. Again. From the start, something felt off. Loretta made every decision. Where we stayed, what we ate, what we wore. She'd bring matching outfits for the women, long linen skirts and embroidered aprons like something out of a postcard. When I hesitated to put mine on, she said, "When in France, dear." Then smiled. Cold and sharp. Amber played along, of course. She was always the golden one. The good daughter. The voice of tradition. And she never missed a chance to remind me I wasn't born into this. Every time I offered a suggestion, where to eat, what route to walk, I was gently ignored. "You wouldn't understand, Meadow," Amber would say. "This is family history, not tourist stuff." Even Thomas, usually neutral, started snapping. "You're making everything difficult. You're always so American about things. You don't get how much this trip matters to us." Each night, I lay awake in that quiet little guest house with the old wooden beams and flowered quilts, wondering how I'd become the problem. The woman who once had a thriving career, her own apartment, a circle of friends, was now the outsider tagging along on a family trip where her voice didn't matter. I wasn't their daughter-in-law. I was a guest, a tolerated presence. And I didn't realize until it was too late that Loretta wasn't just being difficult. She was testing me, setting me up. And soon, she'd make her move. It happened over dinner. We were sitting at an outdoor cafe in the village square, tiny candles flickering in glass jars, the smell of roasted lamb and lavender in the air. A local band was playing something soft and old. It could have been beautiful. Loretta was going on about family traditions again, how women in our family were always the glue, how we keep things running behind the scenes. She smiled at me when she said it, like it was a compliment. I'd spent days biting my tongue, letting the jabs roll off. But something snapped that night. I looked at her, then at Thomas, and said quietly, but clearly, "I think it's time I go back to work when we're home." The table went silent. Loretta's fork paused midair. Amber looked up from her wine. Thomas blinked like he'd misheard me. I repeated it. Design work. Freelance. Just a few clients at first. Loretta laughed. Not a real laugh, short, sharp, like a cough. "That's funny, dear. You think we came all this way just for you to announce a midlife hobby?" I felt my cheeks burn. "I'm serious," I said. "I miss it. I want something that's mine." Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Now? After everything Mom planned? You bring this up now?" "I didn't realize I needed permission," I said, too calm for how I felt inside. Amber rolled her eyes. "Maybe you should think about what you already have before chasing something else." I stood up. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I just needed air. Thomas followed me outside. I thought, stupidly, that maybe he was coming to support me, to talk, to say he understood. Instead, he hissed under his breath, "Why do you always have to make things about you?" I stared at him. "I've spent years adjusting to your family, fitting in, shrinking myself down just to keep the peace." He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then maybe you need to figure things out, without us for a bit." And he walked back inside. 5 minutes later, I saw the rental car roll past. Loretta in the front seat. Amber laughing in the back. Thomas driving. I stepped into the street, waving. At first, I thought they were turning around, but the car kept going. The taillights disappeared around the corner. No message. No note. No key. Just gone. I checked my bag. No passport. No credit cards. Just a few coins and my wedding ring. They'd left me. On purpose. For a moment, I stood still, heart pounding. Then I looked around. At the shuttered shops. The fading sun. The unfamiliar signs. I didn't even know the name of this town. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered to myself, "All right then. Let's see what happens next." And I turned, walking back into the night alone. That first night was the longest of my life. I wandered the village until I found a tiny and tucked behind a bakery. The owner didn't speak English, but she saw my face a red, hollow, shaking, and simply handed me a key. I paid in coins. Barely enough for one night. She showed me a room with a narrow bed and a sink in the corner. It smelled like yeast and lavender. I didn't sleep. I lay fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, phone clutched in my hand. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Just that spinning wheel. I kept hoping the door would creak open. That Thomas would appear guilty, apologetic, holding out his hand. But no one came. At sunrise, I walked to the cafe where we'd eaten. I checked every table. Every alley. I asked a server if she'd seen my husband, Mon Mari. She shook her head. Back at the inn, I dumped my bag. My passport was gone. So were the credit cards. I'd let Thomas carry them in his wallet, safer while we travel, he said. All I had left was my wedding ring. I stared at it for a long time. Then I slipped it off. By noon, I'd found a pawn shop 2 streets over. The man behind the counter looked at me, then the ring. He didn't ask questions. He just counted out the euros, enough for maybe a few days. It felt dirty. It also felt like breathing for the first time. I didn't call my parents. I didn't check in with friends. I wasn't ready to explain. Instead, I bought a sandwich and sat alone on a bench near the bus station. My phone finally buzzed back to life. 1 bar. Still no texts. No missed calls. Not from Thomas. Not from Loretta. Just silence. I could have waited. I could have begged. But something in me hardened. They left me behind. So I chose to keep walking. By the 3rd day, I had 32 euros, 2 bruised apples, and a bus ticket to nowhere. The plan, if you could call it that, was to keep moving. Stay ahead of my panic. Push forward until the grief got tired of following me. I chose the farthest destination on the bus board I could pronounce. A coastal village near the southern edge of France. It wasn't even on my map. The ride was long, hot, and quiet. I stared out the window while my body ached from lack of sleep and my heart felt like it had been hollowed out and left behind. At one point, I realized I hadn't said a full sentence aloud in nearly 2 days. When the bus pulled into the final stop, a gravel patch next to a fruit stand, I stepped off, legs shaking. The air smelled of sea salt and crushed rosemary. The village was small, sun-drenched, and oddly timeless. Whitewashed buildings, terracotta roofs, vines climbing up stone walls. I wandered aimlessly, backpack slipping off one shoulder, until my vision blurred. Hunger, dehydration, exhaustion, it all caught up. I collapsed on the side of a dirt road, halfway between panic and surrender. That's when I heard her voice. Soft, urgent. French, then broken English. Madam? Vous, okay? I blinked up at a woman in her 60s, sun-worn skin, gray hair pulled into a knot, blue apron dusted with flour. She knelt beside me and offered a canteen. Drink, she said. Her name was Elise. I learned that much from the way she patted her chest and said it slowly. I pointed to myself. Meadow. She helped me stand. Her grip was strong, steady. She didn't ask what had happened. She just motioned toward the hill behind her, where an old farmhouse sat beneath olive trees. We walked together in silence. Inside, her kitchen was warm and cluttered. Jars of herbs lined the shelves. Something savory simmered on the stove. She sat me down, poured water, sliced bread, handed me a bowl of lentil stew without a word. My hands shook so badly I nearly spilled it. She didn't flinch, just refilled my glass. That night, I slept in a small room with shuttered windows and a quilted blanket. The bed creaked. The pillow smelled of lavender. It was the first time I'd felt safe in days. The next morning, Elise greeted me with a nod and strong coffee. She laid a folded cotton dress on the table beside my bowl of plain but clean. It hung loosely on me, but I wore it with gratitude. Through gestures and a translation app, I told her pieces of my story. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, stirring dough as tears ran down my face. When I mentioned my husband leaving me, her lips pressed into a thin line. She said only 2 words. Not love. I nodded. No, not love. Over the next few days, I tried to leave twice. Each time, Elise stopped me gently. The second time, she handed me a photograph, a young woman with Elise eyes, arms around a dark-haired child. She pointed to the photo, then to her chest. My daughter. Then to the horizon. Gone. Australia. She mimed holding a baby, then pointed to me. Her eyes welled with tears. I understood. She wasn't keeping me. She was trying to keep someone. I stayed. We didn't speak much, but we fell into rhythm. I helped her knead bread, hang laundry, gather herbs. My fingers blistered. My back ached. My brain stopped replaying that night in the village. By the end of the week, I could understand her when she said rest, eat, careful. I could feel the rhythm of her world replacing the chaos of mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to be perfect. Or likable. Or enough. I was just human. And somehow, that was finally enough. I didn't plan to stay. But weeks passed, and leaving became less of a goal and more of a background noise I didn't feel the need to listen to. Elise and I settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for work, kneading dough, feeding chickens, picking herbs from the garden. Afternoons were for olive trees. Evenings were for quiet. I started to sleep through the night, eat full meals, breathe without flinching. Then one morning, she handed me a pair of boots. Sturdy, old, well-worn. She pointed to the grove at the edge of the property. Time, she said. We harvested olives side by side for hours. The work was brutal. My hands swelled. My back screamed. But something in me, something long asleep, woke up. This wasn't just labor. It was effort that mattered. By the 3rd day, I stopped counting blisters. By the 5th, I was climbing the ladder faster than Elise. By the end of the 2nd week, I was part of the process. And then came the bottles. Elise pressed her own oil, a small batch, every season. She sold it at the weekend market in the neighboring village. Glass bottles with handwritten labels. No branding. No story. I asked if I could help. She nodded. That night, I stayed up sketching on the back of an old ledger, label ideas, layout, a short bio in both English and French. Pressed by hand in the hills of Provence. When I showed her the draft, her face softened. She didn't say much. Just patted my hand and said, "Pretty." We printed them on thick, recycled paper using an old inkjet printer I found buried in the closet. She let me design the display table. I picked wildflowers to frame the setup. Sales doubled that week. Elise said nothing, but left an envelope under my plate at dinner. Inside, 47 euros. My share. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Earned. Honest. Free. I placed it under my pillow that night, just to feel it again before I fell asleep. That envelope felt heavier than anything Thomas had ever handed me. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that I could rebuild from nothing. That I had value beyond how well I hosted or how quietly I obeyed. I didn't post about it. I didn't reach out to anyone back home. I just kept working. Each week, I helped refine the labels, tweak the blends, improve the flow at the booth. I learned how to identify spoiled olives by scent alone. I built a spreadsheet for Elise inventory, taught her how to track expenses on a borrowed laptop. For the first time in years, I felt useful. Smart. Whole. One evening, as we closed up shop, Elise said, "You stay longer, yes?" I nodded before I even realized it. And, just like that, I did. They showed up on a Thursday. I was labeling bottles in the press room when Elise called out from the kitchen window. "Visitors." I stepped outside, wiping my hands on my apron. The rental car was new, polished, out of place against the olive groves. Loretta stepped out first, heels sinking into the gravel, followed by Thomas in his usual travel uniform, chinos, a pressed shirt, sunglasses he didn't remove. They both stared like they weren't sure if it was really me. I didn't rush. I didn't flinch. I walked right up to them, arms crossed, olive oil on my sleeves. Thomas opened his mouth first. "Meadow, this has gone far enough." Loretta stepped forward. "Sweetheart, we were worried. We didn't think you'd actually disappear." I raised an eyebrow. "Worried? You left me in a foreign country without ID or money." She blinked. "It was just a reset. A chance for you to reflect. You were spiraling." "No. I was waking up," I said. "And you didn't like it." Thomas's jaw tensed. "We didn't mean to scare you. You could have called." "I did," I replied. "I called both of you. Dozens of times. You blocked me." He looked away. Loretta folded her arms, her voice colder now. "You're overreacting. You had a tantrum and ran off. Now it's time to come home." I pulled the folded paper from my back pocket and handed it to Thomas. He opened it. "Divorce papers." He paled. "You're serious?" "As serious as you were when you watched me disappear in your rearview mirror." Loretta stepped between us. "Don't do this. Think about your reputation. Your life back home." I smiled, quiet but sure. "I am thinking about my life. That's why I'm staying here." She scoffed. "With these farmers?" I glanced back toward Elise, who stood in the doorway, silent and steady. "With people who value me. People who never once asked me to be smaller." Thomas looked down at the papers, then up at me. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But at least the life I build will be mine." Neither of them spoke again. They got back in the car and drove away without another word. As the dust settled, Elise came to stand beside me. She didn't ask what was said. She didn't have to. I had stayed quiet for years. But in that moment, under the same olive trees that once saw me broken, I finally stood whole. They never came back. Not a call. Not a letter. Just silence. Which, in the end, was a gift. A week after they left, Elise handed me a small envelope. Inside were official documents, partnership papers. My name next to hers. "You work," she said. "You stay. You build." It wasn't charity. It was trust. And I signed. My days filled with purpose, tending the grove, blending oils, greeting tourists in broken French. My nights were simple. Dinner, laughter, the quiet hum of crickets outside my window. I started writing again, just little things. Ideas for home design, sketches of how we might turn the old barn into a tasting room someday. Elise encouraged every plan. One morning, while cleaning the old storage shed, I found my phone buried in the bottom of my backpack, dead, dusty, untouched since the day I'd arrived. I charged it out of curiosity. There were messages, of course. One from Thomas. "I still don't understand what you're doing. You've made your point. Come home." And another from Loretta. "If you're done punishing us, let's talk like adults." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That same evening, Elise and I sat on the porch, sipping strong tea and watching the sun melt into the trees. She looked over at me and said, "You different now." I nodded. "I feel different." I wasn't the woman who begged to be seen. I wasn't the wife who waited for someone else to decide her worth. I wasn't a project, or a problem, or a passenger. I was home. And for the first time in my life, that didn't depend on anyone else. They left me behind thinking I'd fall apart. But I didn't. I rooted deeper. I rose stronger. Sometimes, the cruelest thing someone can do to you is exactly what sets you free.